Thanks. So I'll see you guys in a minute.
Thank you.
If I could clarify
Mayor,
for
one of the
Mr.
things-
Carey, the Police Statistics and Transparency Act, A5472A, requires comprehensive public reporting of all deaths in police custody, as well as data on enforcement of low-level offenses, including violations and misdemeanors. I don't know if that's different from the other ones that you had mentioned or not.
I think it's quite similar, and we can still. I've been out of that part of it for a little while, but still, have touch with it. But I think they still have to do their state reports and their reports to the FBI as far as crimes, misdemeanors, so forth and so on. But this would just be in connection. As far as death in police custody, that comes under the corrections law. So therefore, that's been being done for years. So it must be that they've just compiled everything and put it into a special stat act. I believe that police agencies have been doing that and are still doing it, through e-justice, DCJS, the reports of the FBI. And I know that the Commission of Corrections, you have to call them immediately for all in custody deaths. So, and that's been going on for years.
Politicians don't make laws. It doesn't seem like we're doing our job, so I can see why the state would try to push something else through that might just be redundant.
Right,
Well,
and just call it a different name, but incorporate everything into one.
Yeah, well, and I would hope DCJS is proactive in making that easier for us to do. A lot of it they do, they're not timely with the stats, but I'm hoping that there's some funding that goes with that for DCJS to help us streamline it and make it more readily available. I think that would be great, but they definitely, from what I know, like what has already been said, it is being done. It's just not easy to I can't sit at my desk and print up a report on, how many stops or how many this. I can only do crime reported, but it'd be nice if DCJS helped streamline that or implement it better.
I want to apologize to everybody right now for about the first 10 minutes. I forgot to hit record. So, but we are being recorded now. So.
If I could say something before we get way too deep into the discussion about the role of the police, there's something I want to address. If you've been following discussions about this committee on social media, there have been a lot of people who've been concerned about statements made by certain members. I just want to, for the record, say that what we're here about is the future. What we're discussing is not an indictment of the chief or the chief designate or any particular officer. With one major exception, all the interactions I've had in my time here with the Olien Police Department, officially and unofficially, have been absolutely professional, effective. It's not that we have a problem now, but if you look at what happened in Bradford recently, they had no problems, and then they changed chief to someone who was really not qualified, was improperly trained, and suddenly they had a scandal. What we need to look at is not only what's happening now, but we have to find ways to safeguard both the police and the community in the future to try to avoid problems when or if bad apples do pop up down the road. And I think that we need to keep that in mind.
Be proactive, definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. So unless anybody else has comments, let's move on to the what functions should the police department perform? So I guess this is kind of just a discussion. What you think our police department, what you'd like to see in a police department, and functions that you heard some of the functions that they perform. Being former law enforcement, I can tell you that I'll just give you a quick little story that I was working a midnight shift, and we had an older lady who called about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was cold out this time of year. And she said her furnace, she couldn't get any heat in the house. So we went over. I went over with those of you who remember Terry Shear. He was a longtime officer. Went over, and so we went down, and we checked her furnace. We checked the pilot light. We checked all that out, and told her that geez, we didn't know what was going on here. And so when we were down in the basement, when we come up, there was coffee made. And she said, well, have a cup of coffee. So we had coffee with her and talked to her, and said, you're probably going to have to call somebody to fix your furnace. We don't know what's wrong, So then Terry said, well, where's your thermostat? So he went over, and the thermostat was turned way down.
Oh.
Okay. So the very next night, we turned it up, the furnace kicked on, we had our coffee, and we left. Well, the very next night, got the same type of call. And 2 other officers went over. And so we heard the call, and we didn't have cell phones back then. So we drove over and told the officers, here's what's going on. Well, when they walked in, she not only had coffee ready, she had donuts ready. So to make a long story short, she was a very lonely lady, and she wanted somebody to talk to. So she turned her furnace down, and we were able to get her connected with Department of Aging and that way there. But those are some of the things that in a small community that you do as law enforcement. I don't know if the chief said unlocking vehicles, things like that. So having said that, let's have our discussion. And I'm not locked to an hour tonight. If we go an hour and a half, that's fine. So let's have a discussion. What you think our police department should be doing, or functions we should be performing.
Well, do we have like on the suggestion here from other people on page 9 of the governor's guideline, do we have that coalition with social workers to help in case of something that the police department can suggest to the that this case is one for like that needs a social worker instead of a policeman? Like, for instance, you did your Department of Agents. Do we have that kind of connection with right now?
I believe, my first answer is yes, but I think we can have Ron Richardson talk on that. Danny McGraw can talk about that in the school, his connection with the social workers and that there. So Dan, you want to start off? You want to talk a little bit there?
Yeah, so we deal a lot with CPS and also social workers that help out with tenant support and everything like that. I noticed that, I guess it's not a favorite thing to do to have a child arrested. And since I've been the resource officer the last 5 years, I've probably arrested, I don't know, 15 or 20 kids. But I have to say that the kids that I have arrested, I'm probably closer with them than I am with anybody else. And the reason why is because these kids need outside help. Outside help being that they don't have support at home, and I lend out a helping hand in any way I can. And so I know that it's unfavorable to see like kids under the age of 18 be arrested, but the kids that get arrested, in my opinion, need to be arrested because they don't have what they need at home. I mean, so we get CPS involved, probation. There's other groups that help out with, like I said, like attendant support. There's also social workers and counselors outside. There's Liberty Partnership. I don't know if anybody heard of Liberty Partnership, but they help out with homework helpers and everything like that. So there's many outside agencies that help out. And I just don't want everybody to think that, you know, the school resource officer is there to arrest kids for, you know, having marijuana and fighting and all that kind of stuff. The kids that get arrested, in my opinion, we look at on a case-by-case basis, and we decide as a group whether that kid needs to be arrested based on his home life and the support he gets outside of his house.
Can I ask
Della,
a question?
I thought that was a really good point, Della, that you raised. I wonder if it would be helpful, Bill, if we could invite somebody from community services to participate, Mary O'Leary or Melissa Ball, because they, and Daryl, you can, if you're probably know more about this than I do. They work more with people in crisis, I think, than any other agency in our county, and they have the resources. It might be helpful, and I'm just raising it because I do think that's an important point. I know our police officers have to deal with mentally ill people every day, and it, you know, and they don't have all the resources in their wheelhouse that a social worker or a mental health person has, and it puts them in bad situations, I think, sometimes, especially like 941 type of situations where somebody's hurting themselves. But I wonder if it would be helpful to include either Mary O'Leary or Melissa Ball or somebody like from that field, just to be part of the conversation, because I do think that's one of the biggest things that put our police officers at risk, and also the community. And it's usually it's a lot of times mental illness, and, you know, but there's nobody else. I mean, a lot of times it's just this poor patrol guy that has to respond because somebody locked themselves in their room with a knife, or, you know, and you need a police officer there too. But I do think maybe including community services or some kind of mental health in our group might help the discussions. I know I'm really weak on that link. I think probably a lot of us are, because it's not our field. So that's just a suggestion. And I think Della raised a really good point.
Well, right now, as to what Lori was saying, every month we meet with Melissa Ball. You brought up her name. I meet with them every month, and we have what's called a high service utilizers meeting. And yes, we're police officers. We get called initially to these calls. And Lori had mentioned the 941. That's when someone's gonna harm themselves, okay? I don't wanna say it's simple, because it's not. But for us, we take them into custody and take them to the hospital so they can get checked out to make sure they're okay. Now, there are a lot of calls we go to where it doesn't meet that threshold, but the person's still not okay. But we can't take them into custody because they're not a direct harm to themselves or someone else. So at this meeting every month with community services and other service agencies, patients that we deal with a lot and they deal with a lot, they'll sign a waiver so we can discuss them at this meeting. So we can all work together to think of ideas that can make things better for them. So that, to a certain degree, is already in place, and we've been working on that for probably the past couple of years.
Well, I go to those meetings too, Mike, and I agree. I mean, I think we're able to address specific individuals, and it's really helpful, but not all of them come through the criminal. I mean, and I know even in our meeting, they're not all through the criminal justice system. I just mean as part of the conversation is all, because we do a lot of good, I think, with that. But that's
I think it'd be great to have her, Melissa or someone else as part of this committee. I think it'd be fantastic.
Just to be more proactive on the mental health thing, because none of us, I don't know everybody in the meeting, but I know, I speak for myself, I have no knowledge of what's available or the field or anything like that.
Well, I think that it's terrific that law enforcement is involved in all of those matters. And I think Della and Lori, you're right on point. One of the things I was going to recommend is adding a social worker to the staff of the Olien Police Department. At our office, we added a social worker to our staff and a staff client liaison. And the reason was I would go to courts, and sometimes somebody would be released from incarceration, and there'd be a major housing issue or a drug dependency issue. a lot of problems that I was ill-equipped as a lawyer to address. Just, I think law enforcement's overwhelmed by some of these issues, and have somebody on staff who's familiar with housing procedures and able to get people the assistance they need, it will end a cycle of people returning to the criminal justice system and provide the necessary help. I mean, our office was completely enriched by having a social worker. I know Sheriff Wickham, discusses the trauma that officers get exposed to in the course of their work, and a social worker can also be, a help to officers doing their work, just like they are to our staff who confronts human tragedy on a daily basis, as I'm sure law enforcement does. The other, general principle I think that I wanted to propose is also that we fund law enforcement well, so that we attract the best candidates. I know many wonderful officers like Ron Richardson and Divine Leacock and Stephen Dombeck and Casey Austin, people who really are terrific. And if you look across the country at, well-run law enforcement agencies, you almost never see any instances of police brutality from the FBI, because they're well-trained and they get good training and they're well compensated. So I think you attract the best people to this business by funding it well. So I think a social worker and good funding is the key to good, responsive law enforcement, and it's good for our neighbors. Thank you.
Daryl, I'd like to second that. I think at some point in this process, I think that should be addressed and looked into, is the funding and the pay scale, and exactly what you said. Cream will rise to the top, and you get what you pay for. And if we expect good quality, educated, trained law enforcement, we need to present ourselves and have that type of police force and community that people want to work here. They want to be police officers here in Olien, and not just come to Olien to be a police officer for a year or two so that they can then move on to the sheriff's department or to a different community because they have a different pay scale.
Absolutely.
I would like to also say, when Mr. McGraw was talking, he was saying that sometimes they arrest the kids because of the that they don't have a good home, or they have problems outside. I don't really think that a kid should be getting arrested because his home is messed up. I think there should be other avenues that we could take instead of arresting that child. I don't know, but once you get into that system, it's hard to get out. So because that child has a bad home, or he doesn't have the support that we think that he should have, he gets arrested. I think we should look more into that.
Well, a little clarification on that. An arrest of a juvenile. Juveniles don't, we call it arrest because that's kind of what it is, but it's different. All right. They don't go into the criminal justice system. All right. We petition them to family court, and family court is there to help children. Our juvenile division, we are there to look out what's best for the child. Now, whether that's, referring them to some kind of counseling, sitting down with the parents and seeing what can be worked out for the betterment of that child. And what Dan was referring to, if we sit down with the parents of the child, we don't think that child can succeed by just that. Okay, they can be referred to family court so services can be brought in to help that child. I mean, it's legitimately to help the child. That's what the juvenile justice system is for.
I would invite you guys to look at information about the pipeline to prison with just that. The family court system is the criminal justice system, and they will end up in there. I've seen it many of times happen. And I would just invite everybody in the group to look into the pipeline to prison and see for yourself the stats and data on that.
So Mike or Dan, just as a point of clarification, so is that arrest in the juvenile family court system, is that what triggers the cascade of the other services that help that student or child?
It absolutely can. I'm a former juvenile sergeant for our department. So Dan, I apologize if I'm walking on you. It does. I mean, like I said, an arrest, it's not an arrest. It's petitioning of the family court. And there's several diversion programs that can be put in place. And yes, the vast majority of times that's going to trigger services for them. And if we can avoid doing that by working with the family, and we think that can work out, like I said, it's all about what's best for the child. And if we can do that without petitioning the family court, hey, that's ideal. But sometimes that's what we have to do.
So are those services available, or can they be plugged into those services without being?
Well, like I said, if we talk with the family and the family's
okay.
all on board, hey, great. But if
Great,
that
okay.
support system isn't there for them, unfortunately, that's going to have to be made to happen. Does
Yeah.
that make sense, Barry?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Well, here's another thought. What about the language that we're using in these situations? Now, a school resource officer, when the average layperson hears arrest, we picture handcuffed behind the back and the perp walk and being fingerprinted and locked up in holding. Why? Maybe if we just refer to it as an intervention, for example, or find another term, because arrest is a very loaded term. Police and school resource officers can and should intervene when there is a problem that needs to be addressed with a child, that they need to have their situation resolved or improved. But referring to it as an arrest automatically sends up people's defensiveness.
I can second the motion. I can second the motion on that. And even being a police officer myself for 27 years, you call them arrest. I think of everybody when it comes to the juvenile portion of it, if they would refer to it or think of it as a petition to resolution, I think that we probably all be on the same page.
Yeah, and in these juvenile cases, our state recently passed raise the age. Well, a couple of years ago, when it's being implemented, the age is going up for criminal responsibility every year. Like now includes 17-year-olds too. In almost all of those cases, especially since bail reform, they're just given an appearance ticket to go to county youth part or to go to family court. And sometimes we do diversion too, where they just go to this, they go through probation. There's a program that probation works with them and, like making sure they go to school, making them get counseling if they need it. And in most of those cases, there is not any type of punishment, but I think the use of the term arrest is maybe a little inaccurate because it's actually more of I'm sorry, my dogs are barking. It's actually more of a appearance ticket in most cases.
What happens when them kids violate probation? What happens then?
It depends. That it could result in detention, a detention facility. So yeah, it definitely could have punishment though.
So a kid could end up going to a detention center because he doesn't have a good support system at home. That's not right.
I agree, and that I can't say that's not true because I'm sure it is.
I've been through the juvenile system. I was placed in a home when I was a teenager. And it all started in school when a kid who didn't like me, and there was nothing beyond that, he just didn't like me for one reason or another. We played baseball together. That's all I knew about him. He's giving me crap for a little while, and he bumps into me in the hallway and he gets in my face. And he puts me in a position where, you're staring each other in the face, and a fight broke out. And a female teacher, stood in between us to try and break us up. And she got hit. And because that teacher got hit, we were both arrested, or petitioned, as you might say. But we both had to attend anger management, and that was the resolution. What did it help? Nothing. So I'm not so sure that police and schools are the end all be all. And as we look to free up resources for other services, that's a great place to start looking.
I think
I'm
that
going to disagree with that one there, because growing up in the city, we've had police officers in our schools as youth, and we actually called them officer friendly. And there were multiple police officers. They knew us by name. We knew them by name. They were great for providing a sense of security. They were also good for giving us someone to look up to, to aspire. And these men and women, they came by. They always had a smile on their face, so they were always approachable. If there was anything, issues or concerns that you had, you could always talk to them and bring up issues, and they would take care of it for you. So I think that each and every person's experience is unique. It's different. But while we're doing this, let's try to make sure that we keep our personal bias out of the decision making of what we're discussing. That way, we can come up with something neutral.
Let's also be sure to take all perspectives into account.
I think the juvenile justice system is really beyond the scope of this committee, and it's a thorny and involved issue that we're not going to solve here tonight. I think in our report, we probably should include some language recommending an overall review and overhaul of the juvenile justice system, which would solve a lot of problems that police, especially school resource officers, are having. But I think that we're going to get a little sidetracked if we start discussing the obvious flaws in the juvenile justice system as it exists today.
There is a movement, and there's been a movement for many years now in the overhaul of the juvenile justice system. And like Lori stated earlier, the raise the age juvenile justice reform. And, back when I was doing juvenile work, you could get petitioned to family court at the age of 15, and at the age of 16, you could actually be arrested in criminal court. So that movement has raised that up to, I believe it's at 18 now for certain things, but so that movement is in process. And you're right, Pat. We can recommend changes in this report, but it's not what, it's things that, and how juveniles are treated, for lack of a better word right now. That can be one of the recommendations in this report. One of the things that I want to, and we haven't touched on with juveniles, we also have youth court. And that's a process that is run by high school students. And it's a program where a youth who has done something wrong can go before his peers, and they can sentence them to do some community service or things like that, to and get them some other services too. So there's a lot of different processes, but involving that. But there is, and it's still an ongoing reform. The juvenile justice system is an ongoing reform, and Ty, you're very right. The pipeline to prison was one of the reasons that started that reform, and you see it especially on Rikers. Out in New York, you had 16-year-olds being sent there, and that didn't do them any good at all. It didn't do anybody any good. So the court system has recognized that, and there is a movement, and continues to be a movement for juvenile justice reform.
Bill,
Karen, go ahead.
I look at this committee and working for as many years as I did for the state, I get this feeling that there's going to be funding tied to the outcomes.
Mhm.
And I do feel that the state's going to come down with some blanket, policies that all police will have to, live by. Just to make a mental note here, do we have enough resource officers in our school? Is Dan our only one right now? Do we need more?
Yeah, he's
Uh,
he's our only one right now. When the program first started, we had two. We had one in the high school and one in the middle school. And then as funding, but those programs were almost completely funded. And and then when the funding went away, the city and the school district shares cost for the officer in the schools. Now,
I'd like to keep a running tally here to say, look, I'm a firm believer to, catch them early intervention so that they don't end up in a pipeline, as often as we possibly can to get any child support services and families. And we're in a location that we don't have a whole lot of counseling and psychological services overall. You look at some of our suicides and things like that, where we could have had intervention. So much of that's being brought to the forefront. Do the police officers need more secretarial support or, to keep them on the street? If we had them all inside doing paperwork, what good are they? So I just want to keep in mind, in the end, if we're going to put something together that will tie with grant money or juvenile court system or whatever our area needs, that we can put this together so that we can get and secure funding. We saw it in the 9/11, with fire departments and security and borders. I don't want to miss that boat. And I just wanted to make that point tonight that, in the end, there's going to be money put out for training, for education, for biases, whatever that might be. And during this process, whether it be Mike or Dan or the new chief, keep track. So when this report goes out, we have a really good grasp at what does our community need so we can be the best in New York. And we're great. I mean, I love our police department. They've always done a great job that I have seen. We are here to find any shortcomings or things that we can improve upon. In the end of the night, I want every resident to go home safely, and I want every officer to go home safely as well. We live in a great community, and I don't want to miss that funding boat. And something is telling me that's going to come through. It might be another year or so, but I think it's going to happen.
Ann has her hand up. Ann, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, because I think we're starting to digress, but I'm a little bit concerned, and I want to kind of be careful about how and why we get to a point where the school resource officer connotates negativity or that it's a bad thing. It's a support system for many, many children, and I have the thought, and I'll wait for statistics, that when they're saying that they're arresting juveniles, I think that's probably pretty rare. My personal observation from being the director of 306 apartments, almost half of which are families with children, I cross paths with the resource officers. They call me. I send them a list of the children age 18 and under in my courts. I often, in fact, just the other day, I will see Mr. McGraw at one of my properties, and he isn't knocking on the door looking for the kid for any nefarious reasons necessarily, but out of concern. Where has this child been? Why hasn't this child been in school? Is everything all right in this home? And I'm there's an undercurrent of negativity about a school resource officer when it's not necessarily something I'm comfortable with, because they're there as a support network for kids to go to if they need help, if they need to talk to somebody, in addition to the resource officer being there to intervene when there's legal issues and so forth. So I want to try to understand more the negative connotations of the school resource officer. I don't see it. That's not part of my experience with the school resource officer.
Mickey has his hand up. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I thought it would be best, just in keeping with the topic as well as to answer your question, Ann, to read directly from the workbook that we all have. There's a paragraph on page 19, specifically talking about should law enforcement have a presence in schools, and the conclusion paragraph to that section says, If you have SROs in your schools, consider the creation of a memorandum of understanding or agreement between the police department and the school district so as to clearly establish their roles and responsibilities. For example, these provisions could limit or eliminate altogether police involvement in student discipline matters, or require special training for SROs in conflict resolution and alternatives to arrest when dealing with youth truancy in a school setting. So, it is something
I
that
don't
I've,
understand how that's directed at me and my presentation about, I just don't like the negative connotation. That's all I'm just saying I don't particularly understand or where a negative connotation comes from. I support processes and more defined job descriptions if you want, or what you're presenting. Yeah, that's great. And I support that completely, but I'm not sure how directing that at me was a response to me just expressing my opinion about the negative connotations of school resource.
sure. I don't know about negative connotations, but the idea here in reforming and reinventing police is to limit the amount of interactions police have with young people, especially in a school setting.
What about positive interaction?
Once again,
I think we also,
if you could just read it, there's good stuff.
Sure. Yeah, gladly, Mickey. But again, I'm confused at why you're directing it at my comment about negative connotations. It's not.
I don't know what.
The two don't go hand in hand. I'm going to read that as soon as we're done. Thanks for pointing out the exact chapter and place within the literature that we were provided. I'll look right into that. Thank you.
Okay, I got
Greg Carey, if I can make a comment.
Yeah, Greg, you were up next, and Kenny Wright is next. He wants to make a comment too. So Greg, go, and then Kenny will get you.
I think what we all have to keep in mind during this whole process is I don't think that our mission is to reinvent the police. I believe if we really look into the guidelines and the purpose of the police reform and reinvention collaborative is so that the community has more of a say-so in policing and the police interact and have more of a base with the community. Now, in my opinion, there's no better place to start than with young children when it comes to interacting with the police. It's community policing. The old saying, today's children, tomorrow adults. So if we could start the interaction in the community policing with the young adults and the children in the schools now, then that keeps a good relationship between community as they get older and as they grow, between the community and the police. And I think that's what part of our objective as you read all this 100 and some pages in this thing. In my opinion, that's what this is all about. The police and the community working together and making things happen together and having a better interaction with each other.
Kenny?
I just wanted to touch on school resource officer just for a minute. The School to the Prison Pipeline is the name of the book that Ty was referring to. It's something that I've had national training on probably 14 years. This has been discussed in larger cities like Baltimore, New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago. And as Vern was saying, in this bigger cities like he went to and the schools that he went to, school resource officers are huge assets. In Olien, in our community, our school resource officers are huge assets. They don't, when they're talking about, like, we already know, when they're talking about arrest, they're not talking about actually cuffing the child. I've seen our school resource officer do things, talk to kids in the weight room and calm them down when they've had bad days. That's what they do here. They don't do the same things that they do in the bigger cities. So I kind of want to, like Ann was saying, I don't want people to start trying to think that our school resource officers are the same as the ones that are in Chicago or in Los Angeles, because that's the reason why the governor wanted us to do these for our individual communities rather than just pass a bunch of laws and force them down our throats. He wants us to come up with solutions for our community, not Buffalo, not Syracuse, not New York City. So I just wanted to put that out. And secondly, I'd also like to, we kind of discussed pay earlier on. If that's going to become a topic, because like Karen said, I do believe there's going to be funding coming. I think you're going to see the community resources come back again, the community policing, come back again, and there's going to be funding because they just can't pass a bunch of laws and push it down our throats without funding. But we also have to require, if we're going to give a pay raise, there's got to come also additional training that they're required. If somebody's going to make more money, they need to be more qualified. So if we start talking about pay raises, then we need to have, maybe cross training, continuing education classes that go along with that pay raise. That's pretty much all I got to say.
Ty was up next. Ty.
I just want to say maybe people felt because how I said what I said. What I was saying was if we're going to have school resource officers, then their mind shouldn't be thinking, let's arrest this child because he needs help at home. That's all I was saying. I believe that we do need school resource officers in Olien. In Olien, school resource officers do work well. But what I'm saying is, if that school resource officer, his first instinct is to arrest a child because he has a bad home, that's not good. We need, if we can't help that school officer come up with a better solution than to arrest that child, then I don't think he should be there.
Okay. Mickey, you had your hand up next, and then we'll go to Kevin Doherty.
Yeah, I just want to add in the reason why I hit on this is only because, and it's the next part of our discussion, I think, is the planning and the budgeting aspect of this all. We only have one school resource officer. We only have a very limited amount of funds as a city. At some point, discussions will begin on how to work in community services. Maybe you need to hire a crisis response or a social worker of some kind. Doing community policing, having extra time available to walk the beat, things like that. You're gonna have to look at things, where can we save money and stuff like that, because there's not a whole lot of money coming in from anywhere at the moment. And as far as, grants and state funding, you can't always rely on that. So we have to budget from within on this. So just to keep that in mind going forward, and noting that we are pretty small city, and we only have one school resource officer. That seems like a go-to thing if we need to free up some resources.
Kevin Doherty, and then we'll bring you back, Kenny. Okay.
So I want to touch on something that I think Karen originally brought up and then Kenny just brought up was the funding. As I'm sure Lori can speak to, Chief Rowley, I don't know how much Officer Marshfelder or Ron have to say on this, but I'm sure they're all well aware, as well as you are, Mayor, that unfunded mandates come down from the state all the time. The most recent, the Bail Reform Act, and what is it? This reporting, we have to give evidence over within 48 hours. We have to drop all charges or something like that. Our police department had to put men on the task for just that task alone of submitting resources to somebody to monitor all the reports and everything like that and send them off to the DA's office within 48 hours. That's something, and then their office has to have somebody that's collecting them all so that and then just all these unfunded mandates, and maybe grant funding will be there down the road, but you never know, right? It's one of those things that you can't count on. As Mickey just said, you really can't count on any of that to be funded. So anything that we do, and I'm all for bolstering the pay raise to initiated officer to new officers coming in to be an incentive to come to our area, so we're not just a stepping stone to give them experience to be to a higher pay raised area, like the sheriff's department or the state troopers I hear have primo bennies, and that's where we're losing them all to. But at the same time, we also have to figure out how to pay for it. officers walking the beat, that's extra man hours, that's overtime, that's additional officers, that what have you. Every one of these things, it all comes down to dollars and cents. And I give you guys all the money I have into the coffers to help pay for that, but I'm just one guy, and that'd probably be a drop in the bucket on one officer's pay. So just to throw in my 2 cents about the dollars and cents.
But also, Kevin, let's get one thing clear. Public safety has to be the main priority of any city. Police departments are something that you defund less important things to keep funded when there's a crisis. Yes,
Sure.
there may be some grants coming down the road. It would be nice, but we still need to try to figure out how can we give the police the resources they need to be effective in their job. Now, when I was running last year, all up along North 2nd and 3rd Street, I had people say that they were constantly having things stolen from their porches, that they were afraid of violence breaking out. And the one thing that they thought would solve that would be police walking the beat again. Now, the Olien police are overworked. I don't deny that. We need to hire new officers, and we will find the money to do that if we have the will to do it.
Yes, I guess I'm up. The mayor wasn't here to call on me, but I'd like to say, Kevin, what do you think about maybe a 15% property tax reduction for any police officer who would be willing to live in the city? It's part of a pay raise. That's something you could do without having to find additional funding. Secondly, I'd like to say, I think we should have a second resource officer in the middle school, because sometimes it takes a child, like Vern says, to have a role model, to have them understand how to achieve things, somebody they can go to and talk to and don't have to be afraid of the police. As someone who worked inside of a federal prison for 23 years, I've seen a lot of guys that ended up in jail because they didn't have that one role model when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. That resource officer with the proper one, with the TCI training, it's therapeutic child intervention training, could actually be an asset to our community, our small community. I think the second resource officer, that's something we need to get back into the middle school. That's all I had to say.
Yeah.
Ty had his hand up. I'm back. Ty, go ahead.
I would suggest that, because everybody thinks it's a good idea until it's their kid that's in family court. So I would suggest that you guys really think about that, and maybe it's not the question isn't if we should have a school officer, but what the role of his, of him being there is his role to arrest kids? Is his role to be that role model? Is it, like we're going to have to, we got to come to, an even balance here, because I understand, like, I didn't grow up here. I grew up into a bigger city. We had police officers. We had metal detectors. We needed them. Olean's not like that. So just for the same reasons that you guys say that you need that school officer, and I'm not saying that we don't. I'm just saying maybe we should look at changing his role, what he's there to do.
Go ahead, Ann.
Well, I guess I'm a little concerned that there's a misunderstanding or not enough education on exactly what Dan McGraw does or is doing or has been doing. I would urge you all to simply Google Dan McGraw, Olien Resource Officer, and you will be enlightened that he's not walking the halls arresting our students. He's delivering lunches. He's fixing computers. He's de-escalating situations. He is the resource officer of the year in New York State. I have to interject that I think that we have to look at specifically what Dan McGraw is doing and what his job description says. And he's not walking the halls arresting children. I think that's a misconception that's being perpetrated here. He's Mr. Wolf could interject perhaps, but Dan McGraw specifically, and I'll speak, not all resource officers, but the one that we have currently here working for us in Olien is developing relationships with children, some of them that desperately need it. So I think arrest, and when he said, when I don't know how it got brought up about, if the kid has a bad home life and he gets arrested. I get what you're saying about that, Ty. I'm the director of public housing. I know that there are an awful lot of children that are on a slippery slope, and it's because they're not getting the support they need in their home. I understand that. And I think that maybe was misworded right out the gate, right off the bat. And I really think that might have been misrepresented.
Aaron Wolf, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, that it's been really interesting, just from an educator standpoint, to hear the dialogue this evening, because I can speak completely towards Dan's work in the school. I've been in the school 4 years, so I'm really young in the system in Olien, but I've been in education for 17 years. I've worked with about 4 resource officers, and I've never seen them arrest anyone. Now I know what Dan speaks of, and I do think it's certainly more of an intervention that occurs. But the things that I've seen happen and I was a high school principal too prior to coming to Olien, just so I had a little history with some of the behaviors that can enter into a school. And we always relied very heavily on those individuals who were resource officers for support to a situation that we sometimes didn't know the whole story behind, and we needed that added layer of support that wasn't from a law enforcement standpoint at all. And so I can just speak towards that. Those are my experiences. And then the other thing I just wanted to say quickly is I find it also very interesting that when we're discussing concepts related to policing and community policies, that we've spent an interestingly a large amount of time discussing schools. I find that very interesting, because I think that what it does is it raises the issue, which I think Ty pointed out very early, which is we have a responsibility in how we are communicating what the police should do and be seen as in our schools, because it's a critical and important concept. And I've heard the word community mentioned so many times in this discussion. We are a community, and therefore we need to rely on one another to adequately support and communicate what the police force should and ought to do. And I think it starts in schools. I think that's a great, and so what it does for me real quickly is I think it raises the concept of how do we as schools have our own policies in place to adequately address some of these misconceptions that might be out there. But just real quickly, speaking only as a small portion of Olean City School District, we value very, very much the school resource officers. We've talked many, many times about wanting more, and it is very similar to a funding issue that we face as well. So I just wanted to say that quickly and just interject there a little bit. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mickey. We've spent an awful lot of time on the school resource officer, and I think we might want to move this forward a little bit about what other functions of the police, what other functions should police be performing. So Mickey, we'll let you make one more comment on that, and then I think we can move on. I think we've got a clear picture on what's with the school resource officers so far, and that can be in our final plan recommendation for that.
One item of many to come, and I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing us to meet weekly now. I actually want to close that out with a question to Mr. McGraw. In the school, hopefully you can hear me, Dan. In the school, are you intervening in student disciplinary actions, or is that left completely in the hands of the administration?
That is left in the hands of the administration. pretty much what I do is I walk the halls of the school. I participate in activities such as like the weight room, and I go to high school events such as sporting events, concerts, and stuff like that. And based on what I see, if I see a kid having a bad day, I'll sit down next to him, discuss what's going on. If I see a kid, he punches a locker when he walks by, I might go for a walk with them, find out what their deal is, see if I can help out. I also make deals with kids that are having a hard time doing work. I'll offer them like a lunch. You go to class for 5 days in a row, I'll buy you a taste of pizza. You do this and I'll do this for you. So that's pretty much my role. I also take care of problems when like there's criminal mischief to the school or fights or whatever like that. I might have to intervene with discipline where there could be someone petitioned to family court. But for the most part, I'm just there as a helping hand and try to get the kid turned around to do other things.
So there's no like, scared straight sort of thing where you go in the principal's office and say, look, buddy, I've seen this before. You're headed down a bad path. None of that stuff happens. You're almost removed while you're in the school. You're almost removed from, public safety, typical police officer things. It sounds like you're there as, a school official.
It's a program, and we can give you more information on the school resource officer program. But I think we've significantly covered this, and I think we should move on here to give other people a chance to talk about what they think our police department should be doing. So, agreed? Everybody agree with that? All right, thank you. Pab, go ahead.
Chief, here's a question. Some cities and counties have established the 311 number for non-emergency situations. It is great that the Olien police are able to help in non-emergency situations, but it might not be a bad idea when the calls come in that aren't an emergency and they know they're not an emergency, that they go to an operator who can then connect them with social workers or with aid organizations. I know it would probably have to be done at the county level, and again, we would need grant money to do it. But do you think that a 311 number might help you lessen your workload?
I think it would.
When I left the department, there was a number that you could call, and it had all these resources. And I don't know, is that still Mike or Danny or Ron? Do you know if that's still active?
Not that I know of. Whenever we need something after hours, we generally call the county and see who is on call. If it's a social worker or child protection services, the county is our resource.
Okay. We can that can be checked out. There again, remember, we are going to put together a recommendation to send into the state. So I just want you all to keep in mind that yes, grant money may be coming, but with the financial difficulties that the state is having right now, taking money away, it may not be anytime soon. So not sure if everybody knew or not, but we get state aid. It's called Ames funding. We have been advised that they are going to reduce that by 20%, which to the city of Olien, we get about $2.3 million in state aid. So do the math. That's about $460,000 that we're not going to get, and that's going to affect the current budget. So these are things that we have to deal with. So our plan, when we put our plan together, we have to put our plan together, I believe, as though funding will be there, to support the plan. But we'll have to cross that as we move forward here. So it's there's been a few that haven't had a chance to get to get any suggestions in or that. I want to give everybody the opportunity. Is there anybody else who has not spoke, would like to suggest some things on how they would like to see their police department?
JR, you're very soft-spoken.
Kim, I hate to put you on the spot, but I know you have been a social worker. Do you have any thoughts on what we've been talking about here?
Well, when I was a social worker, I did a lot of work within the criminal justice system, and I did groups for people who are on probation and for state parole. These were people who were on probation or under the supervision of parole. And, my experience was that within the police system, that social workers had a real role in helping provide services to people who were on probation, supervision, or were in alternatives to incarceration programs that a lot of people were referred to as opposed to putting people in jail or other programs like that. And I think social workers and the services that we provided were a real help and a real aid. We did a lot of assessments and evaluations for the court systems with regards to sentencing recommendations. And there was a lot of work that I was part of a larger group that did this work. And I think that the combination of that with policing helped to really limit recidivism rates, which was what we were really working on. We were helping to keep people out of jail and to help people from recommitting crimes. So I think that the police that I worked with were always really good people who wanted to do the right thing. And they worked very hard and they worked very cooperatively with us. And I think that those two roles working together really help provide services to keep the numbers down in the local jails and the state correctional facilities. So, I think that police officers have a really tough job to do. And I think that all the resources that we can help give them to do their job better is probably the best thing we can do to help keep the community safe, to lower recidivism rates, and to keep as many people out of prisons and state and local jails and correctional facilities as we can. I mean, that was my experience, is that the more resources and the more help you could give the local police departments, the better they were able to do their jobs. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but that's one of my observations.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything for tonight? Well, okay.
How
go
about the
ahead.
roles, Mayor?
What's that?
The roles, are we linking the roles and the functions as the same thing?
Yeah, I think we've kind of mixed that in
Okay.
tonight's discussion. So, we can talk more. Vern, do you have any? Mickey, go ahead. He's got his hand up. I'll let him speak again here. Go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to basically say that everything is pretty well laid out in the things that we could be discussing, the changes we could be making. I just wanted to say that I'm in favor of this whole 144-page document, the process, the guidelines, the studies, the citations. It's all really well done, and I encourage everybody to read it when you find your time. Having said that, policy review is just a very small portion of what this is supposed to look like. What it does and what it does look like is on us. So I just wanted to add in that I hold this committee in high regard to actually help in making changes, sustainable changes, and changes that benefit all in the community.
Kevin?
Yeah, so I guess I just want a little clarification. We are going to give recommendations to the state of New York based on what comes out of this committee. What happens with those those recommendations? Does the state say yes and then they mandate us to implement them, or is it just thank you for complying with our original order and then it just kind of falls by the wayside? I guess this is how government works, right? It just kind of goes in circles, and there's a mandate for this and there's a mandate for that, and then there's no real like end game. You don't really know. With the school districts, they were told to come up with a plan, and most schools kind of lived in fear because they weren't sure, like, well, do we just do remote learning? And then Portville didn't do any remote, you know what I mean? And they didn't know what the state was going to say. And then they turned around and something came up, and I just want to kind of know how this is going to go through the motions. Are we just giving recommendations to the state for them to tell us to go ahead and implement them? Or are they going to say, hey, thanks, and just whatever?
Well, we have someone right down there, the mayor, who can influence, and if we have recommendations on a local level that meets the needs of the police and the police union have no objection, the mayor and the council could implement our recommendations on the local level. It's not just our telling Cuomo, this is what we think and what do you think. We can actually work on implementing some of this stuff locally. We just have to have the will.
Sure. Well, what I was getting at was if we make a recommendation to Cuomo and he doesn't like it, you know what I mean? Like, well, we implemented it, or you know what I mean? It's one of those like, what? I guess the purpose is for us to get thinking about what we want to change, that we might find wrong with, like the community has found wrong with our police department, or if it found things they wanted tweaked and things like that. I guess if we gotten anything from the state on like what will come of our recommendations, or do we not?
Kenny, go ahead, and then I'll answer that question. Kenny, go ahead.
Well, hopefully he'll honor his word, and he said that it'll fit each individual community. But I think what you're going to see eventually is a thing called best practices. They're going to have a committee that's going to sit with the governor, and they're going to come out with the best practices, and some of that stuff's just going to be forced upon us because they consider it a best practice. But hopefully we'll be able to come up with our solutions for our community, and that's what we'll live by, and we won't get things forced upon us. Well, best practices is going to be a term you'll start seeing more and more.
Okay, when I sat in on the webinar with the representatives of the state, to answer the short answer, Kevin, to you is that this is going to go to the state, and there's not going to be any feedback from the state on it. Okay, this is a plan. Remember, we are going to put together a plan and to give to the Common Council to adopt. And then that'll be sent in our plan, just there's a certification that going to go into the governor's office that the Common Council has, or the governing body has adopted this plan that the community has put forth. Now, one of the things that I have talked with some of my colleagues and peers around the state and the governor's office, that this is not we're not doing this just to make change. We are taking a look through all of you, the different aspects of our community. We're taking a look at this to say, okay, do we need change? Does Olien, New York need change? Okay, now we've got to get, and it's been said here, that Olien is not Buffalo, Olien is not Jamestown, Olien is not any of the big cities. Okay? What do we want? What do our citizens of Olean want? Okay? All the policies that you were just given to look at. As our police department following policies that have been set forth? Can those policies maybe be tweaked? All right? But this is not a witch hunt against our police department. This is an exercise that we have to, what this committee was way to put together is that every one of you can reach out to a certain aspect of the community and come back and say, okay, what does our community want? Does our community want? I mean, we spent a lot of time tonight on the SRO and gauging from the conversation here, the SRO is a good program. Okay, so we've got to get focused now back on other things. One of the recommendations, okay, from tonight was to add a social worker to the Olean Police Department staff. That can be in our plan. Okay, there's a recommendation that that position be added to the plan. It is a recommendation to get officers on a department, a better quality or not a better quality. We've got good quality officers, but to bring in better, I think the term was better candidates. A 15% tax cut should be offered to those who are willing to move in the city or to be in the city. So these are the things that this committee has been entrusted to do. So I asked everybody from the start to keep an open mind. And that's what I will continue to ask you to do that and think about what is the best for our community. So, make sense?
Makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Karen?
You know, looking at what we have here, and you heard me say earlier, I want every officer to go home safely. I'm sure somewhere there, and I'll put that in the incoming Chief Richardson's position. Is there equipment or training or body cameras, you know, nightsticks, electronics, whatever, what is it that you need that you feel you would be successful or need here in our environment? When we say we're not Buffalo, I get it. Don't think we're so far away. They're not. Let's go back to 1974. We know what happened. We know we had a shooter. We're not far enough away to think it can't happen here.
Well, it can
And I think a
happen
lot
here.
of people in our community, and Ron, you can attest, because I know you have repeat offenders. We all know we have, you know, drug issues coming down from the cities and dealers. But what is it that you need, whether that be training, equipment? What's your wish list, so to speak? Because, you know, again, if you haven't had new vests in 35 years, you know, I kind of feel a responsibility to say, let's get this on a list and get, you know, your training and your top-notch things that you need. Like I said, somewhere along the lines, we either got to come up with money, we're going to receive money, or we're going to have to put a goal on the back burner as a 5-year goal or something. Small cities, we have small budgets. We all know it. And there's never a time that I will complain about my taxes for OPD or Olean Fire, because they're the best services our city has, without a doubt. So, I mean, I have no problems with that. I get the budget issues, but how many times in the last 10 years have you been said, we can't afford that? We want this, we need this for our protection of, you know, to address these issues. I think I'd like to see something of a wish list of equipment or things that would help you. And I also want to point out tonight before we go, don't ever you know, Mike or Dan, our SRO officer, I think is phenomenal. And I don't want you guys to feel, because a lot of these are questions and we're still learning. that it's a personal attack. It's not that. I just know I'm here to get you the best that you can be for all of us. So that's my good night speech for tonight.
Thank you,
Okay,
Karen.
Darren, you had your hand up in the back there, I believe you want to say something, Darren? Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask, Karen, are you proposing more of like a militarization when across the country, that's what every police station, even in the small towns, is trying to go away from?
And I'm
I just
not
want to see if
proposing
you're,
that.
I just want to be clear on that.
I'm not proposing that. Like I said, I want them to have the tools that they need. It might be a stun gun for all I know. I want to know what they need or what they think they need so that we know, so that we can address these issues. You know, that's what I'm saying. You know, they also have to protect themselves.
Absolutely.
Case of catastrophic events, a neighbor of mine used to always have a SWAT van. He was a state trooper. I don't know if you guys knew Trooper Kaiser before he retired, but he always had a SWAT van. It was full of whatever they needed for, it was a collaboration between the state, county, and I don't know if Olien Police Department ever partook in that, but in case something got radically wrong, it was like what our fire department has for you know, like we have a foam machine that we lend out throughout the county in case of huge fires that need to be handled. Like it was just, something like that. You don't ever expect to need a SWAT team, but when you need one, you kind of want to have the arsenal for one and trained officers for that.
Question is though, what do you use the SWAT vehicle for? If you have an armed standoff, definitely, but you don't call out a SWAT van for a cat stuck up in a tree. And the problem is a lot of larger cities in this nation have been using paramilitary equipment as if it's the answer to policing. We don't have that mindset here, but who knows what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We need to make sure that the cops who come after the current Olean Police Department have the sensibility that they have some kind of restraint to know when you need a SWAT van and when you just need a few officers to put in a presence.
Sure, that makes sense.
You guys have probably, those of you who have gone far enough into the policies, we have policies on the use of our response team and different things like that. So we're now at 8:01. This has been, I think, very productive tonight. If no one else has any comments, I'd like to call it an evening, if that's okay. And we'll look forward to not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday at 5:30. I'll put out a notice, the invitation again for that. And we'll continue on our discussion about determining the roles of the police officers, and we'll pretty much follow along in the book here of that. But remember also, we're doing this for our community. Okay, what we want our police department to look like in our community. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. It was an excellent session. Everyone, please have a very happy holiday season. Merry Christmas if I don't see you. And please enjoy that with your families.
You too. You too. Everybody.
Here, yeah.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank
I'd
you.
just
Have a
like
good night.
to say thank you to everybody for agreeing, for the mayor saying that we could do extra time and everybody had agreeing to that, because this is something serious that we do need time to work on. So I'd just like to thank everybody for agreeing to that and mayor for offering that.
Good idea, Ty.
I think we can plan on at least an hour and a half for every session, okay?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Sounds good.
It's the great,
Yeah,
as Smokey Robinson would say, happy Chinooka.
Take care, guys.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Remember, if you have any questions offline, call me at the office here or stop by and see me. Okay?
Yes,
God
sir.
bless.
Thank you.
Night.